Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining CIVIC and Philanthropy Colorado for a special Colorado presentation with CECP on National Corporate Philanthropy Trends and COVID-19 Response. I'm Amy Switek, the Director of Rural and Statewide Networks for Philanthropy Colorado. And before we get started, I just want to cover a few logistics to ensure everyone's successful participation on today's meeting. First, technology happens. It's sometimes unreliable, so we'll just all roll with it and turn off video or whatnot if sometimes the speaker's internet might get spotty or whatnot. I'm sure we've all troubleshooted that through these days. We give everyone a lot of grace as we navigate this. During our time together, there will be opportunities for Q&A with our speakers, and if we cannot get to everyone's questions, we will have opportunities to follow up. We have a large group of 100 registrants, so please keep yourself muted in order to avoid background noise. And you can use the chat at any time to post a question or comment, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. This meeting is being recorded. It'll be shared out to registrants of this call along with other materials. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Joanne Kelly, the CEO of Philanthropy Colorado.
Thanks, Amy, and good morning, everyone. Philanthropy Colorado is really happy to partner with CIVIC today. You all start your programs a lot earlier than we do, so it's an early morning for our members on the call and for us, but we've actually been planning this for months, so I'm glad we can see at least some of your faces out there and look forward to a joint in-person gathering hopefully in the near future when we can. I can actually already see some of our overlapping members just on my screen here on this call, but for those who aren't familiar with our work, I just wanted to let you know that Philanthropy Colorado provides education and peer learning networks, probably similar to CIVIC for corporate funders and others, and we also provide advocacy for the many philanthropic organizations and individuals we have in our state. And in my couple minutes here, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we've been working closely with the governor's COVID-19 Relief Fund, which, as I'm sure you probably know, has seen a need that has far outweighed the amount of money raised. As you know, so many organizations, so many of our nonprofits are struggling to stay viable during this pandemic. And, obviously, thank you. I see some of you on here, your companies have already contributed to the fund, but if you're in a position to provide matching funds and haven't contributed yet, please know that they go a long way toward encouraging additional donations. And then on the flip side, I just wanted to point out that the fund is hoping to see more requests from rural parts of the state for the funds currently available. So please pass the word if you have networks outside the metro area. I would just, before turning it over, would point you to our website, which has information on many more funds that foundations have set up to focus on certain geographies, issues, and needs. There's a lot of information about the individual giving that foundations are doing, which is obviously going to dwarf the amount in the governor's fund. There's going to be a whole lot of money invested in the situation we're in. But please use that as a resource to complement what CIVIC is already doing to provide you with information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kirsten Vermeulen, to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Good morning. And thank you for your leadership through the crisis response. It has been so incredible to see the collective impact in the philanthropy community rally around shared practices and accelerating the dispensing of those funds, and it's just been extraordinary what you have been able to do in such a short period of time. So thank you for your leadership and for corralling, convening, and inspiring our philanthropy community. So I am Kirsten Vermeulen, Executive Director of CIVIC. Also on the line is my colleague, Jess Welser, and many of our members. It's wonderful to see you all this morning. As Joanne had mentioned, we have been hoping to bring our friends from CECP here to Colorado for many months, but we're delighted to have them here virtually. It's my pleasure to introduce Kari Niedfeldt-Thomas, who's the Managing Director of CECP, and Jinny Jeong, who is the Manager of Corporate Leadership and Company Services. CECP is Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. So it is a CEO-led coalition of over 200 of the world's largest companies dedicated to ensuring their organizations are a force for good. They have been founded in 1999 and over that time have certainly grown. They represent 6.6 trillion in revenues today, 21.2 billion in social investment, 14 million employees in their companies, and 23 million hours of employee engagement. So really incredible breadth in this coalition. And we've asked them here today, as Joanne has mentioned, as well as Amy, in terms of the theme, to provide an update on the Giving in Numbers report that they create annually. They have almost 2 decades of data that they have gathered from their coalition as well as other large businesses. So these are analysis and trends on employee engagement, impact measurement, business integrations, grant making, really extraordinary riches of information for any company looking to advance their social impact strategy. They have promised to offer us some highlights from Colorado as well, which we're very much looking forward to. So we're going to hear from them on their Giving in Numbers report, some of those high-level trends. We'll pause for some Q&A, and then they've also offered to share some insights that they're seeing among their member companies around response to COVID-19 and some of the bold leadership that they're seeing among the companies in their coalition. So I will turn it over to our friends Kari and Jinny.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm sharing my screen. And if you can give me a thumbs up just to make sure that you can see my screen, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. So we are just so thrilled. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us today. And it means a lot for us to have this virtual platform to share our insights. So as Kirsten mentioned, I will be speaking a little bit about Giving in Numbers. And I do want to make sure that Kari gets the bulk of the time today because of the timeliness of the COVID corporate actions and responses. So today you will be learning about the 5 trends that I've kind of narrowed down about Giving in Numbers. And then again, the COVID-19 with a special focus on employee assistance funds, just because we know that that is a top area of inquiry for all of you. As Kirsten mentioned, CECP, formerly known as Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. One important thing for the way that we do our work is that we believe a company's social strategy, so not business, but social strategy is about how it engages with key stakeholders, which include employees, communities, investors, and customers, and that is all tied to company success. This is a visual representation of what CECP looks like today. And we provide a lot of insights, information on our website, primarily for our affiliated companies, but we welcome the general public, nonprofit organizations, others who are doing important work, and many of you who are joining today to consume some of those insights that we make available on our website. 4 different pillars of work that we do from the top and going clockwise. Communication support is one of our major areas. As Kirsten mentioned, CEOs is the backbone of the work that we do. Investors being one of our categories of stakeholders. Corporate leadership, which is about strategy and some of the events. And data insights, which we're so proud that we've been able to do for the 20 years that CECP has been in existence. And it leads to the data in which I've pulled information, our largest Giving in Numbers research. It is available on our website, and you'll see the hyperlink on the bottom. Some differentiators about this report. So it is the unrivaled leader on benchmarking and on corporate societal investment. You'll see in our report that term corporate societal investment, corporate societal engagement It comes in many names. Some of you may know it as CSR. Some of you may know it as corporate philanthropy, social impact, community engagement, whatever it may be called. The report helps companies to benchmark and know exactly what type of work they're doing in comparison with some other leading companies. Our data set is comprised of large companies, so those who have over $2 billion in annual revenue. And we're really proud that because of the long-standing and historical data, we're able to set the trends on what is happening in the corporate sector. Important is that it is self-reported by the companies, and CECP is sets the standards for how reporting and certain things are included in the report, meaning items like how much, when companies report the dollar value of something, CECP has set the standard for what that includes, what that does not include. And you can expect that our next set of data will be arriving this fall, but today's presentation is based on the latest data set, 2019 report on fiscal year 2018 data. So I mentioned that there would be 5 trends that I will be pulling out, and we'll go through it really quickly. So the first is about talking about total giving, corporate giving, and how it's been rising over the past few years. We've actually seen that 6 out of 10 companies increase their giving in the last 3 years. We like to look at that over a 3-year time period. We've looked at it in industry breakdown. We've looked at it in terms of size of companies, whether it's a certain type of revenue breakdown or employee size. And what I did was, because our data set had such a small number of Colorado-based companies, I've looked to see if there were other areas of data that I can extrapolate and then marry with our giving in numbers. Here you'll see that in the state of Colorado, your governor has identified 4 bold issue areas that the state is working towards funding and enhancing. And the color coding here is important because it corresponds to the way that companies across their data set are breaking down their giving. So for example, a typical company in 2018 reported that 25% of their total giving went towards health and social services, which is one of the top 4 areas for your state. And more information on pages 13 through 14 of our giving in numbers. But it just shows you that instead of looking at just dollar value, you can also think about the way that other companies are benchmarking and looking at how and to where and to what they are funding. Now, I know I said there were 4 issue areas for Colorado. Another thing that we like to look at is the different types of focus areas that have changed over the years. So on your screen, you'll see from left to right, these were the areas that saw the biggest increase in companies reporting as an area of high importance. So STEM saw the biggest growth in the last 3 years. Disaster relief, culture, arts, and so forth. We know that next year we'll see a big increase in disaster relief. So that'll be an interesting trend to keep an eye on. Interestingly, we also look at what has changed. So we saw that education was an area where we saw the biggest decrease in being cited. We don't think that that means that education is no longer important. Rather, companies are becoming smarter and becoming better at refining the focus on the type of education. So this is where reporting is important. An important way to also look at giving is looking at total giving by numbers, by percentages. Here, I broke out some data that is by regional level, and this is not in giving in numbers. So you'll see that this is total giving as a percentage of pre-tax profit. And Colorado, which would be in the category of West, so that's the final and the last data point on the screen, the median was 1.34, meaning we looked at all of the companies in our data set. Of those that were in the Western region, the median total giving was 1.3% of their pre-tax profit. So the highest when you look at all of these different categories. But when you look at the dollar value, it was one of the lower. So this is all to say that when companies are benchmarking, when you're looking to see how you are doing, you should look beyond just a single data point and look at the different ways in which CECP might recommend benchmarking. And so you can see more information on pages 46 to 47 of our report. The second trend I'd like to point out in our giving numbers is employee giving. And it actually saw a sign of decline in FY18. Now, this should not be confused with the idea that with the fact that we're seeing, which is that employee giving, employees are already identified as top stakeholder. And we know that companies are matching employee donations. And we also know that companies are increasing the type of limits, meaning they're creating open programs. So 55% of companies are saying we don't set any sort of limit to how our employees' donations will be matched. We know that employees don't participate in giving programs if they don't find enough options with matching with their donation interest. And so we're seeing that trend, and we're glad that companies are following it. However, what we've seen in the decrease is that companies are moving away from some of the traditional programs, such as workplace giving. And we're seeing that because of other increased areas of focus like volunteerism and other ways to engage employees, some of those numbers might be represented in that. More information on pages 20 to 24. And I want to also point out that we have in the back of our giving numbers report a benchmarking table that shows the median matching gifts by different types of companies according to their industry groups. Topic number 3, high level, is that international giving is growing. We've seen that over the past 3 years, the median amount that a company was allocating to international end recipients has increased. And that makes sense given the increased globalization, services, engagement, and product and partnerships that companies are doing. And more information on that pages 15 through 17. I know I'm also speeding through these data slides, and it's because you will have access to this. More information is available in our giving numbers, and of course, we're always here to help answer questions. Slide number 4, topic number 4 is about measuring business impact and how it leads to increased resources. In our research, we asked companies, are you measuring the business value of community investments with employee metrics? The reason why we do this is because we know that companies have been asking for assistance with helping them on how the work is benefiting both their business as well as society. And looking at how companies are implementing different types of employee metrics to measure the business value. The high-level takeaway here is that there were 3 major categories of how companies were measuring business value. One was they were using an existing employee survey. Another was that they were surveying those who volunteer, so employees who have volunteered in a company-sponsored or organized event. And then the third category is using existing data through the HR platform, HR team, and then comparing those who have volunteered for a corporate volunteer event versus those who hadn't. So kind of using different types of data sources to benchmark. Speaking of volunteerism, something important is that there are so many different ways to measure volunteerism. I know that when we look to see companies, it's very common to cite the number of hours. So here I try to find some data that I can focus on just for Colorado companies. And I refer to the Fortune 1000 companies that are headquartered in Colorado. And I look to see that the range of volunteer hours that were most commonly cited in public reports and websites showed a range of 6,000 to 45,000 hours. So when you think about that scale, it's such a wide gap. And so sometimes those companies who are reporting 45,000 hours, most likely they have a larger employee base. So for someone to flip through giving in numbers and say, how does this number apply to me? How can I use it? There are different metrics to use. One favorite approach is looking at the percentage of employees who participate. So in 2018, we saw that a typical company reported that a third of their employees were volunteering, at least 1 hour. So we're not asking how many volunteered multiple times, X number of hours. We just said, what is the percentage of your employee base that has volunteered in 2018? It was 33%. A quarter of our respondents said that they had 50% or higher of their employees participating in a volunteer program. And we like to call that an indicator of a leading company, or in our research, you'll see the term top quartile. Something else to also consider is thinking about the type of volunteer programs that are being offered and to whom. So in this chart, you'll see that paid release time was the most commonly offered for both domestic, which is represented in the orange bar, as well as international employees represented in the blue bar. And more information in our Giving in Numbers report, pages 18 through 21. The fifth and final category of a top trend in our Giving in Numbers was thinking about and showcasing the role of those who are in that corporate societal investment, corporate societal engagement role. Interestingly, when we looked at the data across a 5-year match set, so these are companies that we follow from 2014 to 2018, and we saw that their entire employee base increased 5% during that time. And it makes sense because the economy had been growing, businesses had been strong during that time, but those who were on the teams of a corporate societal engagement, again, that can be CSR, that can be corporate foundation, corporate philanthropy, whatever it may be, and however it may be represented in these companies, that size and growth rate was 12%. So much larger than those when you're looking across the entire company and employee footprint. Here, I also looked at the Fortune 1000 companies again, based in Colorado, and this was a sample size of 19 companies. And the 5% growth of total employees is like saying that the median employee size is 11,500 employees today, but was a little under 11,000 5 years ago, just to give you a scale of what we mean by a 5% increase. We have more information on the employee size, by industry, by structure of teams on our Giving Numbers report, page 27. Here, I want to continue looking at FTEs, full-time equivalents, staff sizes, teams, by also going back to an idea about volunteerism, because we know that volunteerism is connected to engagement, which is a business impact for retention, a top area of concern for companies thinking about the future of the workforce, about ensuring that there is employees who stay engaged and move within your company. Here, we know, and we've collected information on strategies that were successful in activating volunteers and helping volunteers feel engaged. And you'll see on the right-hand side, the most commonly cited strategy was activating volunteer champions or ambassadors or volunteer councils. So allowing the employees to have a bit more of a leadership role in engaging and organizing themselves for a volunteer purpose. And with my final slide here, I had a breakout about virtual volunteerism. We don't talk about this in our Giving in Numbers report, but we know that this is a top area of concern, and you'll hear Kari talk about it as well, because it's so important today to ensure that you are all thinking about how to engage your employees, whether it's volunteerism or not. But some of the best practices, which may sound like a no-brainer to all of us who are doing this work every day, is rethinking internal policies, making sure that some of those volunteer opportunities are converted to into a virtual format. And then importantly, that employees are being recognized and heard for their work. So I went through those 5 trends pretty quickly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Jinny, there is one question that DJ had put in the chat, which is a question around why the West region is the highest percentage of pre-tax profit. I know you will be able to
talk a little bit more about that. I will just start out by saying that it could very much depend on which of the sample size industries are included in there. Sometimes certain industries may decide to lead in certain ways based on who their stakeholders are, their customers, it even could be some of the influencers in the communities where they're located. I know also that there could be top quartile companies located in this sample for the West that could be driving that percentage. And then Jinny, if there's anything else you want to add, would be great.
Kari, you hit all the high level points and many of the reasons that it could be. We'd have to look a little deeper, but I think that it begins with what Kari said initially as our first point. There are differences by industry. And so this, looking at the regional breakdown, is one of many ways to think about total giving. And here in this grid or in this chart, I've only given 2 data points: the total giving nominal value, and then the total giving as a percentage of pre-tax profit. We can look at this in so many different ways that might result in different types of data. And so that's where our giving in numbers benchmarking report might be a good way. And companies should feel free to think about what data points jive with them the best.
There are a couple other questions related to workplace giving. And one of the questions asks what the trends will indicate as an impact on United Way campaigns, or what's recommended for United Way or other workplace giving organizations. Another is around what are companies doing instead. So all of those are interconnected. I have some thoughts, and Jinny, I know you have some thoughts. So if you want to go ahead, or I could start.
I will say 2 points. One is that we are seeing that employees are really liking the idea of having more control and a choice in how their funds are going. So part of it is that we know and recognize United Way as being an important partner for employee giving. But for some individuals and employees, they may feel that giving to United Way is not the same as giving directly to a nonprofit organization that they want all of their funds to go to. So I think, and that's represented in this chart here with companies recognizing that. The other is that even though the proportion of companies offering United Way is going down, I would say that employee giving is still one of the best ways to engage employees. The other being, of course, volunteerism.
I will also say that we've done some additional questions of companies to help illuminate a little bit about what could be going on. And so, yes, as Jinny noted, employees want choice. And the model, I worked inside of a company for years, had a United Way campaign, and we were continually wanting to partner with United Ways in various geographies and continue to do so, but we kept seeing our employee numbers decrease in that. And so what we're hearing is that employees are preferring open campaigns. They're preferring to have, and this is from the research that CECP is having, and I can say this also as a practitioner, employees are wanting to have multiple options. They want to be able to choose how they want. And so the question about what are companies doing, they're offering workplace giving, but they're opening up their campaigns. I think what United Ways have looked to do is to allow for more directed giving. Many years ago, the model with United Way was to have it, you're giving to United Way, and then United Way had committees that would make decisions about how it was dispersed. A lot of United Ways to adapt to this are bringing forward specifically directed theme areas, or it could be like food access or youth education and employment, or they're also bringing forward specific directed organizations that companies could, or that individuals could direct their funds to. But there is this trend, I think we see it everywhere we go, that everybody wants to customize everything from their tennis shoes to their philanthropy. And so this is a societal trend. We're seeing it in our data, and we're talking to companies about it often. When we've talked a little bit about some of the matching gift, we also have recognized that companies are analyzing where they're going to be able to have the greatest engagement with their employees. And it depends on the workforce, it depends on the company, but some companies, we have heard that some have been looking at some of their policies. Maybe they had a certain amount budgeted for matching gifts, and so they've tried to adapt their policies to align with how to be able to maximize that, but maybe they're not going over a certain amount. It could be that a company has made some decisions that there are certain topic areas that they want to promote because it's aligned with some of their broader pillars and focus areas. So a company that, I may want to say, we're interested in supporting environmental causes, but if their employees want to give to something else, then there might not be that alignment. So there are a lot of details beneath all of these data points, but important to keep that in mind and think about each individual company. We're talking as an overall trend, but when you drill into each company, there are some very specific strategies and scenarios. Other questions?
Kari, I think
Yeah,
that we
go
should
ahead.
actually move on to COVID.
Okay.
Can I ask just one question before you all
Absolutely.
move forward? Really curious about the data that you shared on the emphasis on human capital. It's certainly not a surprise, but interested to understand any nuance that you're willing to share in terms of the evaluation of employees who volunteer versus those who do not, and any insights for companies in terms of their own measurement around employee engagement.
So is the question on how we are capturing those, or how companies are reporting those who have volunteered versus not?
Yes, that differential between those who do and those who do not. Yeah.
Yeah, so that actually brings to the point about how measurement is so important, and that CECP, when we make these larger trend presentations, we try to be clear about how we are reporting that. So in our research, and for those who've participated in our research, you know that we ask very specifically employees who volunteered on company time. So through a company-sponsored or organized volunteer program versus those who haven't. The data that I've shown here is going to be all of so the participation rate is for employees who've volunteered on company time, and not something where companies are taking credit for having an incredibly generous and community-facing individual who loves to volunteer. So we do try to differentiate that. Some of the hours that we might report is a aggregated total. So in our report, we do specify that. I think that if there are any questions about how we break out the types of employees and types of volunteer program and participation rate, that is going to be both in our report as well as our accompanying valuation guidance. So it is a step-by-step guide on how companies should interpret the questions, and our definition and a guidance on what we mean by FTE versus on company time or outside company time.
Great. So next we want to share with all of you a little bit about how we have been leading and engaging with companies.
Whoa.
Hello, somebody's unmuted. And so we have been researching a bit around how companies' needs have evolved during COVID-19 outbreak. And we realized early on in March that we were receiving a significant amount of requests coming in from companies. And I can say, all of us personally were being impacted in a number of ways. And so we started a number of initiatives to be able to really help companies and help them lead through this time and really also look at how we could support the field. And so in addition to our ongoing requests that we provide companies who are affiliated with us through various fast track consulting and some benchmarking, we started instituting some weekly pulse surveys, and I'm going to go through some of those results. Those are publicly available. Every week we're posting the new results, so please go to our website and check those out. We also developed a publicly available COVID-19 resources. We have one link for CEOs of companies, and the companies that CECP typically works with are companies that are 2 billion and larger. And also for the corporate responsibility teams, please know that if you are, and I see a number of you on here, one of CECP's companies, we also have some additional resources that we have in our My CECP portal. We've started holding some CEO sharing sessions. We've convened 16 CEOs from 10 different industries and helping the CEOs to talk through these issues. Every Wednesday they're getting together and they're talking. It's a nice opportunity for them to just reflect with each other. As you can imagine, being a CEO of a large company and you're at home is, and you're wanting to be a champion for your thousands of employees, is an opportunity for them to just really reflect and think about what's next. And then we also started leading on corporate peer discussions. I early on had reached out to several organizations who are doing national work, specifically ACCP, Association for Corporate Citizenship Professionals, POL, Points of Light, and COF, Council on Foundations, and we all started meeting and just talking about how we together could really support the field. And we launched a whole series of corporate peer discussions. We have some lessons from those, which I want to share with you. We've held them by issues and by industries, and we're going to be continuing some into the summer heading forward. And so I want to go through now what the Pulse results look like. And so the very first pulse survey that we did, the results we pulled on the 19th indicated this, because we were really trying to get a handle on what are companies doing and why these pulse surveys are important is it helps when we share it back out for all of you as companies to know, are we on track? Are we doing what others are doing? And for some of you who are trying to make the case to make some changes internally, as we all know, senior leaders always ask you, what is everybody else doing? And so we can tell through these pulse surveys, you can get back out to them and say, well, I know some other companies are doing these kinds of activities. So this was really early on. And through this, we were able to determine that 89% of the companies had taken some sort of action, and specifically drilling down a little more, that 36% of them actually put their disaster response plan in place, but then they took some additional action. And the next slide goes through and just shows you the specifics of how that broke out, that 11% of companies at that point hadn't done anything. I think there were some that were just trying to figure out, is this really a thing, or are we just blowing it out of proportion? And I guarantee that that number would not be 11% anymore. And then the 25% had just done their disaster response. The 28 said that they had taken action outside of their disaster response. And then the 36% had done both together, the disaster and some other action. So this was a good indicator for us that companies were launching and moving, and they were also looking to us for some support. And then we waited a little bit because we were in the middle of our data collection for giving in numbers, and we wanted to be able to help companies through some of that data collection period. Of course, because of all that's gone on, we've extended the deadline for giving in numbers. So if any of you out there are still working through your data, please let us know. We're glad to help you get it all in, because it is such an important tool for the field. But as of the 10th of April, we started pulling more surveys, and now we're going to continue to do those weekly for the foreseeable future. And in there, we learned on the one at this point that 45% of the companies at that point knew that their budgets were going to be increasing for COVID-19 response. This was really important because early on, some of what we were hearing is that companies were repurposing their funds or just getting the money out the door, but weren't necessarily looking at how they could escalate that response, because everyone was really nervous about the markets. And then we also found that some are repurposing, but if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the more details in this, that there were 10% of the companies that said they hadn't made any decision, 4% said that they felt that they were going to see some sort of a decrease, 4% felt like it was going to be about the same, but the majority felt like they were going to be able to repurpose it toward being responsive to what was going on, or they were going to be able to increase it. And then we went on to the next week, and we learned that how companies were really pivoting these partnerships. And 86% that they adjusted their policies in some sort of a way. 74 felt like the biggest way that companies were doing that was through escalating payments to their nonprofit partners. And so the details on all of this on the next slide really shows how we wanted to understand operationally really how companies were moving forward. And you could see that there were a few that just couldn't figure out what they were going to do, but many had launched right away. And then the next slide also shows the specifics of how that played out. And the areas we also saw redeploying grants. So if a grant was specifically for a programmatic purpose, they were redeploying it as a general operating. They were looking at new funding criterias. And, you know, we had a lot of companies say, I don't do food, but right now I know food access is a huge issue and we're going to do it. So how do you help me? Help me figure out this topic area. I know nothing about it. And then we went to the next week after that. And this is the latest one that we have collected. And we wanted to really understand how companies were leading beyond just their grant making and volunteerism, how they were kind of looking at this holistically. CECP has a research area, total social investment, really helping companies think about their good beyond giving, or kind of how they're investing in society broadly. And this right here shows that 84% of the companies realized that they were taking some sort of unique COVID response, and 52% of them were figuring out how to count them. And we are getting requests every day about companies saying, help us figure out, how do we tell the story? Because we can keep doing this response, but if we don't capture it and figure out how to measure it, we're not going to be able to tell what that looks like. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see some very, some specifics on what that looked like. You know, we're looking to count it. We're not really applicable. We've done some unique efforts, but you know, we just did them. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that it has some very specific ways of what companies are looking at what they're going to count. The big ones is fair market value of any donated goods or services. For example, we know a lot of companies took their PPE and put it back out into the market. We know of you know, different resorts that took all of their food and they emptied out their restaurants and their hotels and they're putting it out into the food banks. That would be what would fall there. But you know, redeployed staff time. We know of some medical device companies where they've taken an open source code to be able to build ventilators. And they're saying to us, okay, so now what do we say? This isn't something that normally would be sold on the market, but we had a whole bunch of staff time that was spent into figuring this out. So we're helping them come up with ways that they can be able to look at how to accurately share internally and externally what this COVID response looked like. If you go to the next slide, I have a bit of a summary on you know, what we did on some of these corporate peer discussions, the issues that we were convening companies on: food access, leveraging assets to support employees and communities, funding healthcare, educational access, and then supporting employees self-organizing and volunteering. And yes, employees were going rogue and companies were like, oh no, what do we do? They're out there, we're telling them to stay home, but yet they're going out, they want to volunteer. We also have partners like Meals on Wheels that need volunteers to get the meals. So there were lots of interesting ways that companies were figuring out how to adapt and how do they provide some sort of guidance and keep their employees safe, but at the same time allow them to have their human spirit of being responsive to be able to get out there and do that. And then we held 13 different industry segments. The ones that are italicized, those are the sessions that we're planning to hold over the next 2 months. We're having 4 more sessions in May, in June. And then on the next slide, you can see a bit about what I know there were some specific questions about employee assistance funds, and so we wanted to share a little bit about what we're learning that companies are doing. We know that companies are really looking at how they can partner their corporate responsibility teams and HR around building out employee assistance funds if they don't already have them. We know many companies already have these in place, but several, and we have had several requests coming in of companies wanting to start new ones, and really looking at how to expand eligibility. We have been looking at how to be able to increase the accessibility, meaning how do we just lower the barriers for employees to be able to apply for any funding. Some of the companies have been increasing the funds that are available. They've been increasing the caps, meaning that employees can apply for larger amounts. And then there's also been some significant work at looking at, are we really wanting to take this on internally? And we've seen a number of companies just say, we need some outside vendors. The need is so great right now. Redeploying our employees in that way isn't going to be possible. But I will say, for the companies that do feel like they have some capacity on their teams, we had one corporate responsibility team who said that they've fully been turned into working on their employee assistance fund. Then on the next slide, just some final thoughts on some insights that we've gained. We talked a little bit earlier about how companies are just being adaptive. Right now, they are, whatever's needed, they're figuring out how to respond to it, and they're doing it in their communities in a way that is not filled with a lot of barriers, meaning they're not saying the money has to go to a certain way. If they've supported a gala in the past, they're saying, here's the same $10,000. We don't need a table, but you're going to need the general operating money to their nonprofit partners. We see a lot of companies reshuffling their focus areas. There's some companies who've never funded hospitals that are now thinking about how do we do that, because they're realizing some of the demands in the healthcare sector. There are catalytic investments that are going on, specifically around STEM. And we know that a number of STEM partners have been saying for years, we are behind, we need more funding, we're behind in how we can make sure that the next generation is ready. And this is one of those moments where you see partners coming together from multiple sectors to fund opportunities. We have seen some of the rules simplifying for virtual volunteering and engaging employees. We know that some teams are opening up their meetings and writing letters to graduating high school seniors. And we've heard of some teams where they're counting delivering groceries to your elderly neighbor as a volunteer opportunity because the need is there right now. We also know that for workforce, a number of companies have really been looking at the future of work and how they're going to be able to meet the demands. We had one company talk to us to say, it's already taken us 1 year to hire employees for a manufacturing job, and now we are, through the Defense Production Act, asked to escalate it. We are panicking that we are not going to be able to have the workforce that we need. And so I think for a group like this to think about, do your companies have the workforce that they need right now to be able to support your company? We know that people want to get back to work, and how do you make that happen? We know that companies are looking at how they're going to move into recovery and reinvention, because society has to operate differently, and they're reassessing what that could look like. There have been a lot of really innovative partnerships. Companies that previously, I would say, were competitors are now together working on medical devices, whether it's vaccines or testing kits. And we, through a number of different resources, we talk a lot with Edelman, but there are many others that are looking at trust. And right now, employers are one of the most trusted institutions. Government at a local level is trusted more than at national. So I think for all of you to be realizing that you have an opportunity to build those messages out for your community. And then finally, we are seeing total social investment at scale. We started this research years ago with companies, but right now, there really isn't a company who isn't thinking differently about how they can support society. So those are my final thoughts. Any questions? I see some things popping in.
We do have a number of questions. Employee assistance funds, more on employee volunteering data. Can you differentiate between domestic and international? And then a question about what's best in class for accurately measuring and sharing in-kind donations for COVID, whether it's fair market value or cost of goods. Those are just a few.
Well, on that one, I would say we're not your tax advisor, so you should certainly consult with them. I do know that it depends on what the products are or what the services are and what the IRS allows. I know that we've heard the IRS is reevaluating some of these topic areas at this time. So depending on when your reporting periods are, I would suggest giving them a little bit of time to catch up with everyone. But typically, you know, I would say fair market value is usually what a lot of items are planned on, but cost of goods is often how food donations, for example, depending on where it is in the supply chain.
Kari, I'd like
yeah.
to also add, in our valuation guidance, so again, this is the accompanying document to our annual giving in numbers and updated annually, we do break down some guidance, general guidance, again, because we're not your tax advisors, but guidance on how to differentiate between wholesale versus retail and to whom. So I will make sure that that information is shared and circulated after the webinar.
A question about corporate faith-based giving or volunteering. I do believe that we've heard from at least 3 companies that they are no longer being as stringent on that at this time, because if there is a faith-based organization that is providing some sort of food pantry, they're allowing employees to be able to count some of what they're doing. Generally, I would say, you know, there are restrictions that companies, specifically publicly traded companies, have on that, but it varies company to company. The other question, just want to make sure I have it. Did I get everything? Domestic versus international data. So it depends on where a company is reporting from. Some of the companies that are participating in our Giving in Numbers survey are based internationally, and then, but it could be that they may have a headquarters, also a US-based headquarters where employees are volunteering. So we track it based on where the company is, how they're claiming those employees are. We don't track it by which countries specifically employees are volunteering in. Any other questions?
There was a question from Liz Gardner about tracking data around employees who volunteer and overall workplace satisfaction. So that's on Giving in Numbers. CECP, our research collects information on what type of companies are collecting the information. We don't yet have the full details on what the satisfaction rate is. So it's we do feature a component about how companies are collecting information, measuring, and let's see, who volunteer and overall workplace giving or workplace satisfaction. So we do collect information on how companies are doing it, whether they do it, and
our data was really tracking around, are some companies looking at that data and aligning it with their volunteerism, but there are some companies that don't. So it depends on the company at this time. It's not a, it's a trending upward best practice, but I can't say that it is widespread at this point. The other questions related, I know that there was one on the Wall Street Journal article about Business Roundtable. And so Business Roundtable is different than CECP. I should clarify that. And I do know that a number of the Business Roundtable companies are affiliated with CECP. I do think that there are different reports going on around what's happened, and our goal is to be able to help companies lead with purpose during this time. I am familiar with that article, and I know that we have been in touch with the Business Roundtable over the past few months to be able to help them advise their companies on corporate purpose, but we don't have a formal partnership in place to do that at this point. And the other question, employee assistance funds, resources that are out there. We have, there are internal employee assistance funds and there are external providers. I think if a company is interested in starting an employee assistance fund, there are opportunities to be able to work with an external vendor to help you get one started if you don't already, if that's what the question is specifically. And then companies more willing or to empower employees to provide skills-based expertise. I do think that in this time, we are seeing a number of companies, employees are at home and wanting to feel like they're making a difference. And we do see skills-based volunteerism anecdotally going up. We've not measured it at this point. We do have a research publication that we're working on right now, specifically about different types of volunteerism and how that has an impact for employees. And COVID-19 has certainly, we're collecting some research on that right now, and all indicators show that companies are believing that this is an important opportunity for them to give back.
I'd like to add that even before COVID, because this data was of 2018 activities, we've seen skills-based programming such as board leadership training and pro bono service increasing. So I would imagine that when we look back to 2020 data, we'll see some exponential growth in how companies are being creative and innovative in ensuring that these type of skills-based programming trainings are expanding.
Any other questions? Freeing up capital to support for-profit companies, small and medium, come in leadership discussions. Yes, I know that there are a number of companies who have really decided that they need to figure out how to support small and medium-sized businesses, and are looking at ways that they can do that. We have on our website an opportunity for companies to list if they're looking for partners, or to post partnerships where they're soliciting for new companies to join. And there is one right now that was put up recently by Tapestry and Goldman Sachs, looking for companies that are interested in supporting small businesses in the New York area. So I would say if you're interested in looking for partners, put it up on that site, and we're going to continue to keep encouraging companies to, we're referring to it as kind of like a partnership dating site, that companies can find each other there, hopefully, and be able to catalyze partnership work together. Any other questions at all? I know we're almost at time. Anything else? No?
Well, thank you, Kari and Jinny, very much for your time this morning, for splitting your presentation between the traditional giving and numbers and now this wealth of information around the trends that you're seeing and guiding and informing and counseling around nationally and internationally. It's been an inspiring morning. I think we've just scratched the surface in terms of the work and potential of digging into both the data and the trends that you're gathering around COVID-19. We wanted to close with just a couple of announcements from the CIVIC community. Wanted to mention we have some programming coming up that may be relevant to some of the conversation that we've had this morning. So we are hosting a session on virtual volunteerism with Chris Jarvis of Realized Worth next week, May 7th. And he has done, a wealth of analysis around what makes virtual volunteerism effective. And so encourage you to join us for that. We'll also have a COVID response call on May 12th. And I know we have a number of topics that have emerged this morning that we'll respond to. Wanted to mention that we do have a couple of members in our network that have launched some virtual volunteering initiatives that you may be interested in connecting with them in terms of their strategies, and certainly we can help to make those connections. So Bank of the West, US Bank, and also Twilio has recently launched a pro bono site to empower their employees to serve in an impact core. So some interesting innovation emerging there. And then finally, we do have a roundtable that is scheduled. It will be virtual for May 21st, and that is another morning event. Thank you all for being here bright and early. It has been a really dynamic conversation. We appreciate all of your questions. As mentioned, we will share the slides, and I know that Jinny and Kari have gathered some notes in terms of some additional resources that you've requested, so happy to disseminate those as well. Joanne, did you have any final words?
Just thank you to everyone for the partnership and joining us. And if you have more time available on May 12th, we're having a program in the afternoon. So hopefully yours is bright and early, looking at a deeper dive at what philanthropy's role is in ensuring that, you know, Colorado's youngest generations have equitable access to learning opportunities. Because as you know, schools are closed. They may be closed in the fall. That means there may not be summer programs. And all of this is starting to have an impact on student success and families. And we are going to be covering the P through 20. So, you know, preschool all the way through post-secondary college, the impact that all of this is having and what we're going to need to do to address it rather than doing our general type calls. So we would love to make that available to all of you because we have plenty of capacity on our Zoom. That's 3 o'clock on May 12th. Thanks to everybody.
Excellent.
And CECP.
Thank you, CECP. Yes. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining.
Take care.
Thanks for having us.